A third rich entrepreneur has been suppressed in China. He shared information about the violent history of the Chinese Communist Party on a messaging app. One of China's biggest carmakers enters bankruptcy restructuring. Investors see that state-run companies are not a safe bet. Hundreds of policemen tried to demolish an elegant villa area in Beijing, triggering protests. The government wants the land for more profitable projects. A hospital in a megacity in China is suspended due to a CCP virus outbreak. A neighborhood upgraded its infection risk level from middle to high. And a third senior U.S. official is set to visit Taiwan, and Taiwan is starting to ramp up its military power under increasing pressure from China. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A millionaire Chinese entrepreneur was sentenced to 20 years in prison on Friday. That's for having shared articles online about the violent history of China's Red Army.
Chinese entrepreneur Li Huaiqing was sentenced to 20 years of prison in a court in the Chongqing municipality area. Li was sentenced because he had forwarded 7 articles to users of a group on the Chinese messaging app WeChat. They included an article on the Chinese Red Army's history of killing people from the times before the Chinese Communist Party took power 70 years ago. He was sentenced on 4 counts, including inciting subversion of state power. Li's wife, Bao Yan, said on social media she would appeal. She added that she contested the verdict, calling it shameless persecution. Li had been funding disadvantaged groups in China whose human rights had been violated by the authorities. At the beginning of 2018, he was arrested with several of his employees on the charge of involvement in the mafia. But months later, Li was charged with inciting subversion of state power for having shared an article online about the violent history of China's Red Army. He has been imprisoned so far for over 2.5 years. His multi-million-dollar assets, including his company and real estate, were all confiscated by local authorities. Li was the owner of Fuhua Diandong Company. The main business was real estate mortgage pawnbroking. NTD News.
Now we turn to a Chinese car maker, Huachin Automotive Group Holdings, also known as Brilliance China Automotive Holdings. The manufacturer has entered bankruptcy restructuring. A court in the northeastern Chinese city of Shenyang accepted a restructuring application from one of the company's creditors on Friday. The state-owned company failed to pay off debts and accrued interest worth $1.5 million. The court said the auto firm had insufficient assets to pay off its debts. But the restructuring may rescue the company. Huachin is partnered with German carmaker BMW and French Renault SA. The restructuring will not involve its joint ventures. The company has been struggling with debts and losses for years. A situation worsened by the pandemic. Last month, it defaulted on a $150 million bond, triggering fears of bankruptcy. For a long time, investors in China have believed that the debt of state-owned enterprises is safe because Chinese central government will intervene to prevent defaults. But recently, at least 3 Chinese state-owned companies have defaulted, failing to pay off debt. Turning to China's financial situation, according to the Insurance Association of China, the country's pension gap will grow to more than $1 trillion within the next 5 to 10 years. That based on a report from the association released Friday. A pension gap is the difference between the current value of income needed to live and the actual funds saved for retirement, plus the value of those currently paying into the pension system. China's gap is expected to expand even further. That's because of the country's one-child policy, which was in place for decades. As a result, the population of young and middle-aged people has shrunk significantly, leaving a rapidly aging population in its wake. Now we turn to a rampant problem in China, forced demolitions. That's when the regime decides to take over privately owned land to make way for new, often more profitable projects. In one recent incident, hundreds of police officers were spotted trying to demolish an elegant villa in Beijing. It's home to dozens of households.
Authorities in Beijing went to forcibly demolish a residential district with dozens of households. About 500 police officers armed with riot shields were sent to evict residents on Thursday. According to Chinese media, the residents were given eviction notices and were cut off from utilities such as gas. The authorities said the houses were illegally built. But Ms. Liao, a Beijing citizen, told us the owners had bought the land and built the houses in accordance with the relevant policies, laws, and regulations. The houses had been there for many decades. She says the government is irresponsible to citizens.
People have lived here for many years, decades, and then you suddenly say that they have violated the law? You're demolishing such an elegant courtyard and buildings. I think it is a waste of national resources. Also, you are being irresponsible to the people that live there.
Over 100 residents protested against the authorities. They said the police act like bandits.
Please show us your legal documents and talk to us. We, the owners, know nothing about what is happening now. We have not received any notice. This is not the way to treat common citizens, but enemies. We are defenseless.
Forced demolition is widely spread across China, but has been rare in China's capital. In recent years, the municipal authorities in Beijing began to take action. Most of the victims in Beijing are ordinary citizens, with only a few having had power in the past. Others are the second generation of Chinese communist veterans. The purpose for demolishing houses is so the government can use the land to invest in projects for profit, such as selling it or developing it into commercial and industrial areas. Forced demolitions in China often get violent. In June, a forced demolition occurred where police armed with pepper spray evicted about 200 residents in a Beijing village. Another case in June in China's Guangxi province saw demolition workers beat an 86-year-old woman to death. The local police confiscated her body so that her family couldn't prove the cause of death. In another incident last year in China's Shandong province, a victim was pushed to committing suicide after the strain of having his home being forcibly demolished. Reporting by Don Ma, NTD News.
Now we turn to the CCP virus outbreak in Tianjin City. A hospital of the city was closed down on Thursday due to the epidemic. On Friday, a neighborhood upgraded its warning level of the infection risk from middle to high. Nearly 2,000 residents there have been put under quarantine. All kindergartens and schools related to this neighborhood were suspended. 8 cases have been detected, if the official figures are accurate. Earlier this month, Tianjin put the whole city on wartime status, taking strict prevention measures. But the city announced only 1 case of the CCP virus. Experts questioned this contradictory behavior. Hundreds of parked tour buses are collecting dust in a container port in northern Hong Kong. The area has turned into something like a bus cemetery since tourism in the region collapsed. Here's the latest news from Hong Kong.
The buses have been off the road for 10 months since authorities banned non-residential arrivals into the city due to the virus. And to make matters worse, at the end of November, the government will end a wide-ranging wage subsidy program. The Hong Kong government has ruled out an extension to the program, citing the high cost. That will leave many tourism-dependent businesses on the brink of collapse, unable to find other revenue sources and unable to pay wages.
So that's why those buses company owner will plan which buses there is no hope to run the business in the short time. They put it here like the cemetery, put it there, they die already.
Last year, the former British colony was the world's leading tourist city destination. But this year, visitor arrivals have been down almost 99% year on year every month since February. A travel bubble with Singapore will be tested out. But one tour guide said she was pessimistic about the idea.
2020 has been a very sad year for us tour guides because after the border was closed, we had no work to do and had no income. In the old days, we have been through ups and downs, but as long as we were with our clients, we felt very happy and cheerful every day. Now suddenly there are no tourists and we are out of work.
The bubble with Singapore is due to open this week.
Now to Taiwan. The cabinet-level head of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is set to visit Taiwan. It's the 3rd visit by a senior U.S. official since August. Announcement of the visit drew anger from Beijing. The Chinese Communist regime also aggressively reacted when the U.S. Health Secretary came to Taipei in August. That visit was followed by the U.S. Undersecretary of State in September. The Chinese regime sent fighter jets near the island each time. The Trump administration has ramped up support for Taiwan, including with new arms sales. The Chinese regime claims Taiwan is part of its territory, but the democratic island operates under its own elected government and rejects the claim. Now we turn to news from Taiwan's president. President Tsai Ing-wen strongly condemned the Chinese Communist Party on Friday for publicizing a fake news report. During military training drills earlier this year, an F-16 fighter jet from Taiwan disappeared from air traffic radars 2 minutes after it took off. Later, a photo featuring an F-16 fighter jet landing at a mainland Chinese airport was spread on social media, claiming the Taiwanese pilot defected to the mainland. The photo was later found to have been digitally modified. Tsai Ing-wen called it fake news. She labeled it a typical information warfare technique that aims to damage the morale of Taiwan's people. Taiwan is starting to ramp up its military power as China puts more pressure on the island. On Friday, Taiwan announced they will start building 8 submarines. All of them will be developed by Taiwan itself. The first one is expected to enter service in 2024. This is part of President Tsai Ing-wen's military modernization and self-sufficiency plan, representing a major milestone in the national submarine manufacturing plan. Taiwan currently has 4 submarines. 2 of them date back to World War II. They are no match against China's submarines that are able to launch nuclear weapons. According to a survey by American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, or AmCham, U.S. companies are optimistic about doing business with China under a Biden administration. The survey asked 124 company leaders, how has the U.S. election results affected your thinking about doing business in China? Over 60% said they view doing business in China positively under a Biden administration, and 28% of U.S. companies think U.S.-China trade tensions will ease. The president of AmCham, Kerr Gibbs, said that companies foresee stability in the U.S.-China relationship under Biden. It's worth pointing out that the survey assumes that Biden won the election, which legally he has not. Some of Trump's notable policies on China include sanctioning Huawei, which is known to have close ties to the Chinese military. The U.S. intelligence agencies have repeatedly warned that the company's technology may be used to spy on users. He also limited Chinese state media journalists' presence in the U.S. The State Department identified the outlets they worked for as propaganda organs of the CCP. There's a dispute over the Chinese embassy's move to East London as the first consultations on the projects began.
China is planning its largest embassy in the world on the former Royal Mint site in the London borough of Tower Hamlets. China's crackdown on Hong Kong protesters, Uyghur Muslims and Falun Gong practitioners has led to some councillors' opposition.
It's a terrible, terrible, almost reminiscent of what happened in the dark years of Europe between 1933 and 1945, that people are taken for re-education, disappearing, being sterilised, their organs harvested.
For me, this is very poignant, very significant that we call out these actions by the Chinese Communist Party and that we stand up for the values which the East End has always done.
The former Royal Mint site is located at Tower Hill in central London, opposite the famous Tower of London. It used to be a Catholic abbey that was built in the 14th century after the Black Death.
I will be contacting English Heritage to make sure that everything in that planning application is designed to ensure that there is no disturbance to any historic parts of the abbey that could still be there.
China bought the site in 2018. As part of the planning application process, the Chinese embassy sent letters to local residents over the weekend explaining its plans for the site, including the embassy, cultural centre, office space and staff accommodation.
We have actually noticed quite a big difference since a lot of influx of Chinese students and what have you, and a lot of buildings. But then again, you've got the issue of the Uyghur Muslims in China, which is of real concern.
Some local residents care more about investment and the regeneration of the area. China's ambassador to the UK, Liu Xiaoming, reportedly wrote to the mayor of Tower Hamlets saying he believes councillors are attempting to disrupt the new embassy. He says the reports of Muslims being detained in camps, forced into labour, are lies fabricated by some politicians and Western media.
And a new investigative report reveals new insight into China's Confucius Institutes and their apparent infiltration in Germany. Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping says the education programs serve diplomatic and cultural purposes. But information reveals that far more than academic freedom could be at stake.
The Chinese-language version of NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, recently published an investigative report titled How Confucius Institutes Infiltrated German Society. The report concludes that the Chinese Communist Party has deliberately and successfully captured the West. The report details how the Confucius Institutes have infiltrated Germany, the leading power in the European Union and the United States' most important ally in the region. It's based on over 700 publications, both from major media outlets and official sources, mainly in Chinese. While the Confucius Institutes have been widely criticized for attempts to influence academic freedom, the report takes it a step further, saying the institutes have helped communist Chinese influence to permeate almost every aspect of German society. That includes politics, economics, culture, education, art, ideology, and even religion. The report says the Confucius Institute operates in disguise, even down to their name. The education program linking Chinese classrooms to those in the West draws few similarities to Confucius, a famed philosopher who lived over 2,000 years ago. Confucian thought has actually been thoroughly rejected by the Chinese regime since the Cultural Revolution. That's when communist ideology solidified in the country and other traditional ways of culture and thought were purged. Now the Chinese regime appears to have used the name in effort to expand communist ideology. Bao Tong, a former secretary to one of China's top officials, once wrote on Twitter that Confucius Institutes are slaughterhouses of this philosopher and his doctrine, pointing out that they should use the term communism as their surname rather than Confucius. The Confucius Institute has been described by critics as a political Trojan horse. That's because it's under the direct leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. One photo from 2016 often appears in German media reports about the institutes. The photo shows the grand opening of the Confucius Institute in the northern German town of Strassland, featuring Chancellor Angela Merkel. 2 years later after the opening, Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping said for the first time that the purpose of the Confucius Institutes is to serve Beijing's political objectives. He added that China should focus on building a socialist cultural power with Chinese characteristics. The donation included theoretical works featuring communist thought and the record of its social practice. The German government has also extended help to the institutes across several areas. The Confucius Institute in Munich is co-founded by Beijing's Foreign Studies University and the Eastern Munich Foundation. But in 2017, it received nearly $50,000 in funding from Germany's Bavarian state government. The money was earmarked for a renovation project. No other foreign cultural institution has relieved that level of assistance from the state in decades. But the help it has received doesn't stop there. At one point, the Nuremberg Confucius Institute grew too big to fit inside the Nuremberg University campus. So the Bavarian state government and the city of Nuremberg rented a 19th century villa for it to use as office space, free of charge. Despite Germany's generous assistance and friendly attitude toward the Confucius Institute program, Beijing's ambitions to expand its influence are still raising concerns. By the end of 2020, at least 63 universities, 2 governments, and 1 education bureau in the West will have terminated cooperation with Confucius Institutes. The U.S. is among those that have taken a strong stance. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that Confucius Institutes on U.S. university campuses would all be shut down by the end of the year. The U.S. designates them as foreign embassies of Beijing. Even Germany is now taking action. The University of Hamburg has decided to terminate its Confucius Institute's membership. The cooperation agreement was first signed back in 2007. The termination goes into effect on December 31st, 2020. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.